The stale air in the small police station office always clung to Inspector Bala like a second skin, a blend of sweat, cheap disinfectant, and the lingering scent of worry. 18 years he'd served, the lines around his eyes deepening with each passing year, each petty theft, each domestic dispute. They called him Maryam Officer, a title that spoke of respect, yes, but also distance. Strict, quiet. They saw the uniform, the stern gaze, the economy of his words. They didn't see the gnawing emptiness in his wallet, the silent pleas in the eyes of his 9 children, the barely veiled resentment in the voices of his 3 wives. Polygamy. It was the way of his culture, a sign of a man's worth, his virility. His father had managed 4 wives, a sprawling household that, in Bala's youthful eyes, had seemed a testament to strength. Now, it felt like a crushing weight. 53,000 naira a month. A pittance against the relentless tide of mouths to feed, school fees that ballooned with each new academic year, the endless list of household needs. Food money vanished within days, leaving a constant hum of hunger in the house. Aisha needed new head ties for the market. Fatima's youngest had outgrown his clothes again, Maryam's expensive creams, a small indulgence in her difficult pregnancy, felt like a luxury he couldn't afford, yet dared not deny. He'd become a master of stretching resources, of bartering at the market, of mending worn clothes until they threatened to disintegrate. But the shame was a constant companion. The times he'd had to borrow from other officers, the awkward explanations, the thinly veiled pity in their eyes. The lies he'd spun, a sudden illness requiring expensive medication, a burst pipe demanding immediate repair, just to scrape together a few extra naira. Each lie chipped away at his dignity, leaving him feeling hollowed out. Then came the whisper, a serpent's promise in the sterile confines of the station. Officer Usman, his face etched with the wisdom, or perhaps the weariness of years, leaned close, his breath smelling faintly of cola nut. Bala, he'd murmured, his voice low and conspiratorial, stop suffering like this. There's another way. Real money. Easy money. Sharp cash. Bala looked at him, his heart a trapped bird fluttering against his ribs. How? The word was barely a breath. Usman offered a knowing smile, a flash of something unreadable in his eyes. You don't need to ask too many questions, Maryam Officer. Just tell me you're interested. The next day, the invitation came. They met at a bar after their shift, a place where the air hung thick with the aroma of grilling suya and the acrid tang of cheap beer. He did not tell his wives the exact place or location of where he was going. Night duty, he said, the lie tasting like ash on his tongue. The bar was a cavern of shadows and hushed conversations. In a corner booth, a figure sat alone, bathed in the weak, yellow light. A red cap, pulled low, obscured his face, and dark sunglasses hid his eyes, an incongruous sight in the dim interior. His skin seemed unnaturally smooth, almost polished, for a man of his apparent age. There were no pleasantries, no introductions. The man simply spoke, his voice a low, even drawl. I can offer you work that doesn't require your uniform, Inspector. You deliver certain items. You receive payment. With your position as an officer, the job will be much easier as no one will interfere in your deliveries. Bala swallowed, the dryness in his throat a familiar ache. What kind of work? Spiritual errands, the man replied, his gaze unwavering behind the dark lenses. You carry some things to specific people. We will provide the locations. You do not inquire about the contents. You do not look inside. You do not speak to anyone involved. The image of his children huddled together on their thin sleeping mats flashed in his mind. He heard Aisha's sharp words from the morning, the constant refrain of his inadequacy. He remembered Maryam's tearful silence last week, when he couldn't afford the promised meat for her stew. A slow, reluctant nod escaped him. That was the crack in the dam, the first trickle of a dark flood that would soon engulf him. 2 days later, the message arrived, stark and impersonal. No sender information, just a time and a place, midnight. Old Kano Road. Come alone. How they had his number, his private information, was a question that prickled at the edge of his awareness, a disquieting thought he quickly pushed aside. Perhaps Usman, the older officer, seemed to have connections that stretched beyond the dusty confines of the police station. He told Zainab, his first wife, the one whose love had been a constant thread through the tapestry of his life, that he had patrol duty again. She merely sighed, a weary sound that spoke volumes of the burdens they both carried, but she didn't question him. That night, he shed his uniform, the familiar weight of authority replaced by the unsettling anonymity of plain clothes. He tucked his small, well-worn torchlight into his pocket and the thin, tarnished dagger he kept for unexpected dangers. A knot of unease tightened in his chest, a cold premonition that felt like fear taking root. The old Kano Road was a ribbon of darkness under a sky dusted with distant stars. The air was still, broken only by the chirping chorus of crickets and the sigh of a gentle breeze through the dry grass. A sleek, black car was already parked by the roadside, its engine silent, a predatory stillness about it. He approached cautiously, and the back window slid down with a soft, almost imperceptible whir. The same voice from the bar, low and devoid of inflection, spoke from the shadows within. Place this in your boot. Drive to Zaria Junction. You will see a signpost for the market. Leave it leaning against the base. Do not open it. Do not stop for any reason. Do not speak to anyone you encounter. A small, black bag was thrust out, tied securely with a length of thick, red rope. As he took it, he noticed it was strangely warm, radiating a subtle heat that felt almost alive. Is this safe? The question felt weak, inadequate. The voice from the car offered a chillingly pragmatic reply. Do you want to feed your children, Inspector, or not? The weight of his responsibilities settled heavily upon him, silencing any further protest. He placed the bag in the trunk of his aging Peugeot, the warmth seeping through the thin metal. He pulled back onto the deserted road, the beam of his headlights cutting through the darkness. The drive to Zaria Junction was uneventful for the first half. The familiar landmarks, the skeletal silhouette of a baobab tree, the crumbling walls of an abandoned roadside stall passed in a predictable sequence. But then, the strangeness began. His eyes were wide open, fixed on the road ahead, yet the surface beneath his tires seemed to shift and distort. One moment, the rough asphalt was clearly visible in his headlights. The next, it seemed to dissolve into a stretch of pale, sandy earth, only to revert back to tarmac a few seconds later. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, like the rustling of dry leaves, they grew in intensity, seeming to emanate from within the car itself. He flicked his gaze to the passenger seat, then to the back, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was alone. Bala. The sound was low, breathy, almost a sob carried on a distant wind. Bala. Bala, it sounded like a child crying, far away and filled with an unbearable sadness. His foot hovered over the brake pedal, a primal urge to stop, to understand the unsettling phenomena. But the instructions echoed in his mind, "Don't stop, don't speak." He pressed on, the whispers a chilling counterpoint to the hum of the engine. Reaching Zaria Junction felt like breaking free from a suffocating embrace. His hands trembled as he lifted the black bag from the boot, the warmth now feeling clammy and unpleasant. He leaned it against the weathered wooden signpost marking the turn for the market, his gaze darting nervously into the surrounding darkness. The moment he pulled away from the junction, the whispers ceased. Abruptly, as if a switch had been flicked. The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with unspoken things. By the next morning, a notification pinged on his old mobile phone. 150,000 naira. More than twice his monthly salary. The sender was untraceable, a string of random characters. No explanation, no message. Just the stark, undeniable reality of the money in his account. That day, the market was a place of joy, not haggling. He bought a generous cut of meat for each of his wives, the aroma filling their small home with a rare sense of abundance. He paid off the small loan he'd taken from a colleague, the weight lifting from his shoulders. His wives smiled, their faces softening with relief. His children danced in the compound, their laughter a melody he hadn't heard in too long. But that night, sleep offered no escape. He dreamt of a little girl, her small figure clad in a white gown that seemed to glow in the darkness. She stood at the Zaria Junction, bathed in an ethereal light, and her eyes were weeping blood, thick and viscous, staining her pale cheeks. She pointed a tiny finger directly at him, her voice a sorrowful whisper that echoed in the silent corners of his mind. "Why did you give me to them?" He woke with a gasp, his body slick with cold sweat. Beside him, his youngest child, Amina, stirred restlessly, her small forehead burning with a fever that seemed to defy the usual childhood ailments. Amina's fever worsened with alarming speed. By sunrise, her small body was racked with shivers, her breathing shallow and rapid. The local clinic in Ajij, usually bustling with mothers and children, seemed ill-equipped to handle her condition. The doctor, a weary man with tired eyes, spoke of a severe infection and recommended a larger hospital, one that demanded a hefty upfront payment Bala simply didn't have, even with the newfound blood money. Panic gnawed at him, sharper and more visceral than the guilt he'd felt after the delivery. He looked at Amina, her usually bright eyes now glazed with fever, and a terrifying thought took root: was this a consequence? A direct retribution for the unseen cargo he had transported. The dream of the weeping girl at the junction felt less like a nightmare and more like a chilling premonition. Desperate, he approached Usman, the cola nut scent of his breath now carrying a hint of something metallic, something that made Bala's stomach churn. "My daughter, she's very sick. I need more money. Quickly." Usman's expression remained impassive. "These things happen, Maryam officer. It has nothing to do with the work." But his eyes flickered away, a fleeting moment of unease that Bala didn't miss. "But the dream," Bala stammered, the image of the weeping girl vivid in his mind. Usman waved a dismissive hand. "Dreams are just dreams. Focus on getting your child well." He then leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "There's another delivery tonight. Bigger payment. But the location is further. Benin City. Benin. The journey was long and fraught with checkpoints. The risk of being stopped, of the bag being discovered, was significantly higher. But the image of Amina, her small chest heaving with each labored breath, eclipsed all other concerns. "I'll do it," Bala said, the words heavy with a desperate resolve. That night, he lied to all three of his wives, a tangled web of fabricated patrol duties and urgent call-outs. The guilt was a leaden weight in his stomach, but Amina's fever burned hotter. He collected the package from the same silent black car, this time in a deserted alleyway near the Mushin market. The bag was larger, heavier, and emanated a faint, sweet odor that was both unsettling and vaguely familiar, like overripe fruit on the verge of decay. The drive to Benin was a blur of anxiety and fear. Every police checkpoint sent a jolt of terror through him. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, his eyes darting nervously between the road and the rearview mirror. The whispers returned, fainter this time, but laced with a mocking laughter that sent shivers down his spine. The road ahead seemed to undulate, the familiar landmarks of the Lagos-Benin Expressway taking on grotesque, distorted shapes. He reached the designated drop-off point, a dilapidated warehouse on the outskirts of Benin City, just as the first hint of dawn painted the eastern sky. A hulking figure emerged from the shadows, his face obscured by the pre-dawn gloom. He didn't speak, merely gestured towards the open loading bay. Bala dropped the bag as instructed, the thud echoing in the stillness. The return journey was even more harrowing. Exhaustion gnawed at him, the lack of sleep amplifying his paranoia. He imagined police cars tailing him, their sirens a constant threat in his mind. The sweet, sickly odor from the previous night seemed to cling to the car, a silent accusation. He arrived back in Lagos, the city already stirring to life, his body aching, his spirit depleted. The promised payment, 300,000 naira, had already appeared in his account. He rushed to the hospital, the money clutched in his trembling hand. The news was grim. Amina's condition had deteriorated. The infection was aggressive, and the doctors spoke of needing specialized equipment, treatments that cost more money than he currently possessed. The relief he had felt at receiving the payment evaporated, replaced by a crushing wave of despair. The blood money, the risk he had taken, felt utterly futile. Days turned into a torturous cycle of worry and regret. Bala haunted the sterile corridors of the hospital, his eyes red-rimmed, his prayers desperate pleas whispered to an indifferent ceiling. He saw the fear and exhaustion in Aisha's eyes, the quiet strength with which she cared for their ailing child. He saw the unspoken questions in Fatima's gaze, the dawning suspicion that something was terribly wrong. Maryam, her pregnancy now advanced, moved with a heavy weariness, her usual vibrancy dimmed by the pall of their shared anxiety. One evening, as he sat by Amina's bedside, her small hand fragile in his, Inspector Kimi appeared. Her expression was grave, her usual warmth replaced by a professional detachment that sent a chill down his spine. "Inspector Bala," she said, her voice low but firm. "We need to talk. It's about the anonymous tips we've been receiving. And some recent unusual financial activity linked to your account." His heart lurched. The walls of the small hospital room seemed to close in on him. He looked at Amina, her face pale and still, and the weight of his choices crashed down upon him with devastating force. The sharp cash had come at a terrible price, a price far higher than he could ever have imagined. He had sought to save his family, but in his desperation, he had endangered them all. The stale air of his past transgressions now felt like a shroud, suffocating him with the bitter taste of his profound and irreversible regret. Kimi's words hung in the sterile air, each syllable a hammer blow to Bala's already shattered composure. He looked at Amina, her life force flickering like a dying ember, and the realization of his utter ruin washed over him. He had traded his integrity, his soul, for a fleeting illusion of financial security, and now, his daughter was paying the ultimate price. He tried to speak, to form words of denial or explanation, but his throat was constricted with a grief so profound it felt physical. He could only shake his head, tears welling in his bloodshot eyes. Kimi's gaze softened slightly, a flicker of pity in her stern expression, but duty hardened her voice. "We have evidence, Inspector. Witness testimonies, financial records, and something else." Her voice trailed off, a hint of revulsion in her tone. Something disturbing. Before Bala could process her words, a nurse rushed in, her face etched with panic. "Inspector! Your daughter, her breathing." The next few hours were a blur of frantic activity, of doctors and nurses moving with grim urgency. Bala stood outside the intensive care unit, Aisha's silent sobs the only sound in the sterile corridor. He prayed with a fervor he hadn't felt in years, bargaining with a God he wasn't sure still listened to him. But his prayers went unanswered. As the first rays of dawn pierced through the hospital window, Amina breathed her last, her small hand finally still in Aisha's. The grief was a raw, gaping wound that tore through their family. Aisha retreated into a silent world of sorrow, her eyes vacant, her body moving through the motions of mourning like a ghost. Fatima, though heartbroken, tried to be the pillar of strength, but Bala saw the fear lurking beneath her stoic facade. Maryam's pregnancy, already delicate, took a devastating turn. The stress and the suffocating atmosphere of grief in their small home triggered premature labor. The joy of new life turned into a nightmare of hushed whispers and worried faces in the dimly lit delivery room. The baby, a boy, was stillborn, his tiny body lifeless in the doctor's hands. Maryam, weakened and traumatized, clung precariously to life, her eyes filled with a pain that mirrored Bala's own. He had lost them. His innocent child, his unborn son, and the woman carrying his future, all seemingly snatched away by a cruel twist of fate. Yet, in the desolate landscape of his grief, a chilling realization dawned. He couldn't quit. The men in the black car, the voice from the shadows, they had a hold on him now, a sinister leverage that extended beyond mere financial debt. They knew his secrets, his transgressions. To walk away now would not only expose his past, but would likely invite a far more brutal retribution, perhaps even against his remaining family. He was trapped in a macabre pact, bound by fear and the ghosts of his lost loved ones. Days bled into weeks, each one a heavy step through a landscape of mourning and dread. Bala continued his deliveries, the black bag now feeling like a cursed weight in his car boot. The whispers grew louder, more menacing, sometimes even mimicking Amina's innocent laughter, twisting the knife in his already bleeding heart. He saw the suspicion in Kimi's eyes, the pity in Musa's. He was a pariah in his own precinct, a man marked by an unspoken shame. Then came the day his carefully constructed facade finally shattered. He was driving back from another delivery to Abdhan, his mind numb with exhaustion and grief, when he saw the flashing blue and red lights in his rearview mirror. A convoy of police vehicles, marked with the insignia of a special task force, had pulled him over on the Lagos-Abdhan expressway. These were not officers from his local precinct, Their uniforms were crisper, their demeanor more authoritative. Out of the vehicle, a stern voice barked. He recognized the insignia of the Federal Investigation Bureau. This was far beyond Inspector Kimi's local investigation. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the fog of his despair. He was ordered to open his boot. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the latch. The officers approached cautiously, their expressions grim. The sweet, sickly odor that now permanently clung to his vehicle filled the air. The lead officer, a superintendent with a steely gaze, peered into the boot. His breath hitched. He recoiled slightly, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. "What in God's name?" he muttered, his voice thick with disgust and horror. The contents of the black bag, carelessly secured after his last delivery, had shifted during the journey. A corner had torn, revealing the unspeakable within. Not drugs. Not money. But something far more sinister. Something that sent a wave of nausea and terror through the arresting officers. Human body parts. Severed fingers, a decaying hand, wrapped in blood-soaked cloth. The sweet odor was the stench of decomposition. Bala stood frozen, the enormity of his unwitting complicity crashing down upon him. He had delivered death. He had ferried the macabre remnants of unimaginable crimes. The spiritual errands had been a grotesque euphemism for something unspeakably evil. The handcuffs were cold against his wrists. The accusations, sharp and accusatory, blurred into a cacophony of horrified voices. He was bundled into the back of a police van, the faces of the officers a mixture of shock and revulsion. As the van sped away, leaving behind the dusty expanse of the expressway, Bala stared out at the passing landscape, his mind a maelstrom of grief, horror, and the crushing weight of his irreversible damnation. He had sought to escape the clutches of poverty, but he had stumbled into a darkness far deeper and more terrifying than he could ever have imagined, a darkness that had consumed his family and now threatened to swallow him whole. The stale air of his police station office now seemed like a nostalgic memory, a forgotten sanctuary compared to the suffocating reality of his impending reckoning. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Bala's wrists, a final, brutal punctuation mark to his tragic descent. As the police van rattled through the bustling streets of Lagos, the city that had once held the promise of a better life now seemed to mock his ruin. He had chased the mirage of financial security, a desperate father trying to shield his family from the harsh realities of poverty. But in his misguided attempt to provide, he had become a conduit of darkness, a carrier of death. The faces of his lost loved ones flickered in his mind, Amina's innocent smile, the gentle curve of Maryam's pregnant belly, Aisha's quiet strength now extinguished by grief. Their loss was the ultimate, irreversible consequence of his choices, a stark testament to the destructive power of desperation and the seductive allure of easy money. Inspector Bala's story serves as a chilling reminder that the pursuit of quick gains, especially through unethical or illegal means, often carries a hidden and devastating cost. While the pressures of poverty and the desire to provide for loved ones are undeniably powerful, compromising one's integrity can lead down a slippery slope with unforeseen and tragic consequences. The allure of sharp cash can blind us to the profound and lasting damage it can inflict, not only on ourselves, but on the very people we seek to protect. Ultimately, true security and well-being are built on a foundation of ethical conduct and a commitment to the law, even when the path ahead seems arduous. Bala's tragic end underscores the vital lesson that no amount of financial gain can ever compensate for the loss of one's conscience, the safety of one's family, and the sanctity of human life. Thanks for watching. We appreciate your time, efforts and supports. Please kindly follow us for more lesson-filled stories.